In the case of India, you have a long tradition of philosophy and cosmologies developed by Hindus. You have various schools of philosophies among the Hindus. With the coming of Islam, those philosophical systems were now being challenged by an Islamic world order or worldview. And of course, because the Muslims came with power and were able to establish themselves, the Islamic worldview gradually dominated. What is very interesting is that the Muslims did not force the Indians to become Muslims, to the point that the non-Muslims, and there was some adjustment, because some of the Muslim scholars who came into India, and the first Muslim scholar who did a thorough study of India was Biruni. And of course, what transpired at this time was that Muslims were now beginning to have a geographic knowledge, an ethnographic knowledge of these people they are now conquering or ruling in India. And of course, with that kind of knowledge, the Muslims were now beginning to deal with the Indians. Unfortunately, the Muslims did not follow the example of Biruni to the point that they began now to go into deeper understanding of the culture. And this is likely because the Muslims just dismissed them as people who have distorted whatever original message was given to them. The whole field of Orientalism that we now identify with the West, you see, did not develop at that time. There is nothing called Islamic Orientalism. The Muslims looking at Indian culture the way, post-Enlightenment Westerners went to other parts of the world and were looking at those societies through the lenses and filters of Western culture. Biruni went in there to look at the Indians, and he did write about the Indians and explain how they look at reality in light of this personal experience of what was happening at that time. The point I'm making here really is that when you look at the coming of the Muslims were not only coming as invaders or conquerors, they had to also engage in cultural transfer, on cultural transaction with the people over there. It was not a one-way traffic, because there was exchange, as I just illustrated with the borrowing of the zero, which was passed on later to the West and to the rest of the world, and is now part of the collective inheritance of humankind. But there were also points of convergence and points of divergence in this transaction flow. Now, Islam would change the geography of India permanently. Islam did not Arabize Indians, but it certainly changed those Muslims in India in a fundamental way. First of all, they no longer see themselves as Hindus. They see themselves as Muslims. And this is now the root cause of the tension between the Muslims and the Hindus in the area. Even people from the same ethnic group are polarized along religious lines. And certainly an Indian Muslim is much closer to an Arab Muslim than to a Hindu from his own ethnic group, theologically speaking, and sometimes even behaviorally and psychologically. You have the same phenomena in Africa and in Malaysia and some other places. Now, that doesn't mean to say cultural affinities do not exist between these groups. They exist. They can talk in the same language, and they can interact with each other, but they are self-consciously light years apart from each other theologically, because they look at reality very differently. Now, as a result of this, the alphabet changes. You no longer use Sanskrit or any of the script that existed before Islam. You now use modified script, just like in Africa I explained that the Africans had certain sounds. The same thing happened in the Indian subcontinent. They have specific sounds in their languages, and they modify the Arabic script. And this becomes very evident in Urdu, which became the language of integration among the Muslims in that part of the world. Although these people who speak Urdu, as the way European educated spoke Latin in the Middle Ages, I mean, you have their respective ethnic languages, and those respective ethnic languages have been communicated over the centuries through the medium of the modified Arabic script. So that's one impact that Arab influence had in Africa and in South Asia. It will have the same in Central Asia and China and Malaysia when I come to that. The other point I want to make is the whole vocabulary, the whole conceptual system of the Indian Muslims changed. They had new concepts to the point that when they speak Urdu, if you are an Arab or an African Muslim from the East African coast or from the Wall of Wall, you have words. Just like when I was talking about the Swahili, when they say malaika, if you're from India, you say malaika, hey, we have the same word. And you know, like when they talk about wazir, you can see. So in the Western context, just like Latin gave a number of loan words to many of these European languages, Arabic also gave a number of loan words to Muslims. In fact, the transfer is much greater in the Muslim world between Arabic, classical Quranic Arabic, and the Muslim languages. There is hardly a Muslim language that has not been affected in a serious way by the Quranic Arabic. Because if they don't have the concept, they just take the concept from the Quran and make it part of their mental furniture. You see what I'm saying? And the same thing applies to the words that were brought into these languages. And this is very evident in India as in Africa and in Iran.